Hello, welcome to Zoonosis with Joy. I'm Joy, and today we're going to be talking about feral horses in Australia, specifically the Brumbies. Stick around to the end of the video. I'm going to be talking about my upcoming course. So, horses are not native to Australia. They are, in fact, an invasive species that were brought over by the British in 1778 with the First Fleet. Ever since the 1830s, they've quickly expanded from southern Australia, and by the 1840s, they were throughout all of mainland Australia. Settlers who came to the continent, unfamiliar with the climate and the ecology, would sometimes abandon their farms, and they would let their horses out and turn them loose onto the fragile and oftentimes vulnerable ecology of the region. By the end of the First World War, the prices of horses plummeted with their declined use in warfare as well as agriculture and transportation being quickly outpaced by motor vehicles. This caused the population of feral horses to boom to about 400,000 today. There are 1.2 million domestic captive horses in Australia, so if my math is accurate, that means 1 in 4 horses in Australia are feral. So the horses in Australia cause a lot of ecological damage. Horses trample plants as they move along. They also graze quite a bit. This causes a selective advantage for plants that have adapted to these kind of grazing pressures. Horses also will carry the seeds and pods of weeds on their fur as well as in their dung. This can cause a change to the habitats that were once dominated by the native plants that live in the region but are now being replaced by these invasive weeds. This causes a reduction in the diversity of native mammals, birds, reptiles, and even fish. It also causes a great deal of soil erosion. So with these factors combined, it means that these feral horses are causing a huge amount of damage to the vulnerable ecology of Australia. There are very few good management strategies for actually dealing with the horses. One of them is the GnRH vaccine, and if you think back to your high school sex ed course, this is the hormone that is secreted by your hypothalamus and triggers puberty. The vaccine creates antibodies to this hormone and actually can cause the horses to become sterile. A couple of problems with this. It is expensive. It is also not super effective on adult horses. It works best on yearlings, fillies, and colts. So first 1 to 2 year old horses especially. So you hit them before or during their puberty process, basically. The other management strategy that they've tried is actually shooting them from a helicopter. And this is incredibly effective at actually reducing the numbers of horses. It doesn't actually do anything for their actual reproduction. The reason they picked helicopters is because trying to drive over rough terrain on motor vehicles on the ground is actually quite difficult. And as you can imagine, you can't outrun a horse, so you can actually fly after them in a helicopter. Theoretically, this is humane because you can shoot them in the head and quickly euthanize them. However, in practice, of course, even the best marksman will miss every few times, and this could seriously injure a horse and cause a lot of pain and suffering before they can actually die. So there is some animal welfare concerns there for sure. However, most Australians, and I speak about the settler public, I don't really have any good information about Aboriginal peoples who live in what's now called Australia, but by and large, the Australian public actually favors having these feral horses here. The feral horses that live in Australia are very iconic from a cultural perspective. They're on the $10 Australian bill. They're referenced in some famous poetry, such as The Man from Snowy River, and they become a kind of a cultural phenomenon in their own right. 50% or more of Australians actually oppose doing any kind of management, and they actually like the idea of having these feral horses running around. Only about 10 to 20% of Australians think it's actually horses are actually a pest. Now, pest is not a biological term. This is an economic or perhaps ecological term that we use in common parlance. It basically means a species that is undesirable in this location. And horses, if you look at it from an ecological management standpoint, certainly are that way. But the Australian public doesn't actually view them that way. Now, I think this would all tie back to the ideas of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism, of course, seeks to supplant the native populations by importing a number of colonists and using them to, having them establish generations and lineages on new places that they're not from. This is what's happened in Australia. It's what's happened here in Canada, where I live. So the United States is another example. And it is one of those phenomenon that often comes with a biological colonialism component. Think back to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. What was one of the things the Martians did? They brought their cattle, they brought their red weed. And this is the exact same thing the British did. H.G. Wells was actually commenting on the British imperialism to a certain extent when he was writing this book. And it's one of those things that we see with horses as well. Horses are part of this biological colonialism aspect. And it's hard to imagine an Australia without them as it currently exists. Make no mistake, you can't actually exterminate the horses in Australia without removing all the domestic captive horses as well. Anytime anyone's got domestic horses in captivity, there's always a chance that someone's going to turn them out into, out into the so-called wilds. The reason for this is that horses are expensive, and if you no longer want to take care of horses, the fastest and easiest thing to do is just open the gate and let them run out. And anytime that any horses are being kept, there's always this possibility. This is something that's happening in the United States and all over the world, really. So it's one of those things that we have to keep in mind, that there's not really going to be any easy solutions to this. Of course, the GnRH vaccine is promising. It offers some benefits for population control, as does shooting them from the helicopters. There are major disadvantages to both, but there's not going to be any way that we can actually stop the horses from being on Australia without eliminating that. And that's going to either take some major reforms to the settler colonialist state of Australia, or its elimination. And that's a tall order, to say the least. With that, that is the end of my video, but if you want to stick around, I have a course coming up in June. I'm really excited about it. It's appropriately enough about horses. We're going to be talking about different aspects of settler colonialism and horses, specifically in reference to South Africa and the United States. So this is kind of a nice supplemental to that. Check out the description. I have a course sign-up link there. I hope to see you there. If you're not there, of course, feel free to give this video a like or a comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. I often get really good feedback from people who've watched this, and I'm really excited about it. So if you like this video, of course, let me know, and if not, you can always tell me. And thank you for watching. Peace.